Good evening. Tonight's reading is from Zolar's Encyclopedia of Ancient and Forbidden Knowledge. Nash Publishing, 1970, Los Angeles. The oldest science in the world. Before we can discuss what is the oldest science in the world, we must arrive at some conclusion as to the definition of science. What exactly is science? Buckets and buckets of ink have been used in defining the word, but they all boil down to the statement: science is knowledge arrived at by the scientific method. Even more buckets of ink have been used in trying to define scientific method. The essential of the method may easily be described. They are a series of steps, the first of which is direct observation. Of course, what the scientist observes is often the result of deliberately contrived experimentation, contrived in some cases, as it were, to reveal what the scientist wants to see. After such a scientist has made a whole string of direct observations, he goes into a huddle with himself, pulls his beard, scratches his head, or perhaps contemplates his navel. From all of this, he forms an hypothesis or an explanation of some kind for the things he designed the observation and experiments to reveal. This hypothesis is a guess, an educated guess, perhaps, but still a guess. The next step is a simple one. The scientist says to himself, I know my idea is right, and if I do some more experiments, I will be able to prove it. The final step, then, for the scientist is to do the new experiment. If the experiment proves his guess, everything is fine. But if it doesn't, which is often the case, he uses Finagle's laws and introduces a constant into the mathematics or a fudge factor into the experiment. Frequently, merely fudging a little doesn't really prove the original hypothesis, so he takes one other step and draws on the truly mystical realm of mathematics, the art of juggling figures. Now the hypothesis is substantiated, and it can be called a theory. The theory is nothing then but a well-tested guess. Yet such scientists have overwhelming confidence in their own ability and thus make no attempts to teach the limitations of science. In fact, they rarely recognize the limitations. But there are limits to science. Let us consider the question, can science disprove ghosts? Many students of modern science would agree that science has found no evidence nor reason to suspect evidence of spirits. Such things are only superstitions. But ghosts and spirits can appear when the psychological conditions are exactly right. Perhaps one of the very necessary conditions for the appearance of any ghost is the absence of a modern scientist. What then? Science would and could investigate ghost after ghost, but no evidence of ghosts would be found, and if ghosts would continue to appear when the cynical scientists weren't looking. This is a very simple case, yet it illustrates the true impossibility of disproving things by the scientific method. Perhaps this is the case in the current investigation into flying saucers. The Air Force and the scientists seem much more interested in disproving their existence than they are in proving it. Not many years ago, any claim about unknown forces from outside our world affecting the lives and behavior of human beings would have thrown scientists into an uproar. To accept such a concept would have been to acknowledge a belief in astrology. To the cynical scientist, believing in astrology is like believing in ghosts or witchcraft. Paradoxically, scientists consider Sir Isaac Newton one of the greatest of all scientists. They conveniently forget that Newton chose astrology as his life's work. It was with great reluctance that he took up the study of astronomy. He accused his colleagues of thinking too materialistically. He also accused them of neglecting the real cause of events. When fellow members of the Royal Society, true blue scientists, asked Newton why he believed in astrology, he replied, "I do not believe in a universe of accidents, and, after all, I have studied the subject and you haven't." Other notable men who firmly believed in astrology were Chaucer, Dante, Shakespeare, Cromwell, Copernicus, Kepler, Plato, and Bacon. The great Nostradamus based all his predictions on astrology. Astrology is the oldest science in the world. It had its origins in the worship of the moon. Through the long nights before any history books were written, generations upon generations of savages sat and contemplated the wondrous and orderly procession of the seasons and the shining stars in the heavens. Man soon gave them names, and the names were those of the animal spirits he worshipped. In Mesopotamia, archaeologists have unearthed clay tablets recording astrological events which are over 60 centuries old. 5,000 years ago, the astrologer priests predicted the flooding of the rivers by watching the starry heavens. The Assyrian priests discovered the zodiac and its 12 divisions. They even learned to calculate the irregular patterns of the major planets and predicted eclipses. In the early days, astrology was a bloody religious faith. It was reserved for the king and the rich, powerful citizens. When a major event occurred in the heavens, a ritual murder frequently occurred. Such murders rivaled the bloodbaths of the Aztecs. Yet astrologers of the ancient world were the wise men who were the earliest mathematicians and who arranged the first calendars. These same astrologers were the founding fathers of the first universities, and they built the world's first skyscrapers in order to observe the stars in the heavens. The ancients discovered that each planet controlled the health of certain parts of the body, and they thought certain food plants grew best when planted during the full moon. Charlemagne, William the Conqueror, and the Crusaders required the sanction of the stars. War, peace, treaties, coronations, marriages, operations, all these required a special horoscope. The poisoning bourgeois cast horoscopes before giving arsenic to their enemies. Until just before the Spanish-American War, medicine, it depended on astrology. Herbs, plants, and elixirs were all more potent when gathered or manufactured during the proper phase of the moon. During the late 19th century and the early years of the 20th century prior to World War I, astrology fell into dispute. The centuries of opposition by religion, philosophy, and science drove it underground. Einstein's works were the vogue. In World War II, the royal art played an odd role in the management of this great war. Hitler had a battery of astrologers and planned his campaigns on the basis of their horoscopes. There was nothing for Roosevelt and Churchill to do but to employ a special super-secret astrologer to tell them what the German astrologers were telling Adolf Hitler. Even so, the cynical scientific opinion was that astrology was nothing more than a form of witchcraft or mysticism. At best, it was accepted only as a pseudoscience. Today, however, the climate is rapidly changing. There is evidence emerging which shows even the cynics that what goes on in the heavens may have cause-effect connections with all of us here on Earth. The great Swiss psychiatrist Carl G. Jung was intrigued by astrology. Astrologers have always known that by comparing the horoscopes of married couples or couples about to be married, they can determine actual or future harmony or disharmony. Jung began using horoscopes to examine the planetary aspects in the charts of 483 married couples, 966 persons. He used a large group of single couples who hadn't met at his control group. His remarkable conclusion was, the statistical material shows that a practical as well as a theoretically improbable chance combination occurred which coincides in the most remarkable way with traditional astrological expectations. That such a coincidence should occur at all is so improbable and so incredible that nobody could have dared predict anything like it. It really does look as if the statistical material had been manipulated or arranged so as to give the appearance of a positive result. Even though the cynical scientists are becoming interested in astrology again, they are still reluctant to acknowledge their interest. A few, though, do speak out. Frank Brown, a biologist at Northwestern University, has demonstrated that oysters sense the position of the moon and regulate their activities by it. Ordinarily, oysters open and close their shells in phase with the ocean tides. Dr. Brown wanted to see what oysters would do if there were no tides. He hauled some out of the sea off New Haven, Connecticut, shipped them to Evanston, Illinois, and put them indoors in a tank of seawater at an even temperature under a steady, dim light. For 2 weeks, they continued to open and close their shells in phase with the tides at their old ocean home. Abruptly, they changed their rhythm. Their shell opening cycle slipped into phase with the tides, which would have existed in Chicago had there been an ocean covering Illinois. His hypothesis that it was not the ebb and flow of tidal water, but the position of the moon itself which governs the oyster's behavior. The mystery now is, what is the force from the moon which causes this? It is a statistical fact that the birthdays of geniuses, of criminals, of the mentally deranged tend to be grouped in seasons. For example, persons born in March tend to outlive those born in the summer months, and geniuses are born more frequently in the spring. Physiologists explain these statistics by talking about seasonal variations in maternal nutrition during the pregnancy or seasonal changes in the endocrine activity of the mother, exposing the fetus to differing hormonal environments. It is well established that the Earth's atmosphere contains an electric current composed of ascending negative ions and descending positive ions. This field varies with the seasons and the zodiac and could conceivably influence maternal metabolism during gestation. Business cycles were for many years believed to coincide with sunspot intensity. One explanation was that sunspots cause magnetic and ionic storms which alter the ionic equilibrium of the atmosphere. If the proportion of positive ions increases, it would cause headaches and malaise, thus depressing morale and causing a slump in business activity. A meteorologist of the Radio Corporation of America once investigated the effect of various planets on electric storms in the ionosphere and developed formulae which were very similar to those used by astrologers in their calculations of the influence of planets on personalities. Although no scientist has yet determined the physiologic or psychologic effects of ionic storms on the individual, the problem remains open. German seismologist Rudolf Tomaszek found that strong earthquakes usually occur when Uranus is within 15 degrees of the meridian. Two of the world's worst tremors took place when Uranus was in a very specific aspect in relation to several other planets. It is highly possible that changes in the interplanetary gravitational field might produce a tide within the Earth's molten core. This tide would place a heavier stress on a surface fault, and thus earthquakes would occur. The quote-unquote third eye or pineal gland, which was Descartes' sight of the soul, is now considered a clock for the onset of puberty. It is definitely affected by the planets and the seasons. Throughout the history of time, man has always wanted to know and understand the world in which he lives. It has been the custom to treat many of man's attempts at knowledge of nature as folly and superstition, or as pure nonsense. Currently, it is the custom when teaching the history of science to state true science started with Thales. But man has always asked questions about the universe in which he lives. It is far too easy and really immature for the modern scientist to dismiss ancient knowledge in science as crude, contrived superstition. It takes knowledge and experience to compare and judge ideas and beliefs which arise from a different mode of life than that of the world today. The world has affected man in many ways, and has always left strong emotional imprints upon his mind. Fire, flood, crop failure, disease, defeat, and misfortune directly affected man's fate and well-being. Such things as comets, eclipses, and the stars were observed carefully and studied. These phenomena impressed man, and he believed they were vital to his life and welfare. Theories and hypotheses were devised for the coordination and interpretation of the sensory data collected. Early man developed these theories and hypotheses to the best of his ability and not because of fear or superstition. Many such theories failed to observe when time, ideas, values, tools, and basic assumptions changed with man's ever upward progress. New theories were found more acceptable and replaced the old. The old theories, however, were not acts of childishness or idiocy. In reality, these old theories were modified, expanded, and changed gradually over the years to form the new concepts. The astrological outlook was a set of hypotheses which filled a vacancy in the mind of early man. This outlook has outlasted any purely emotional or prejudiced beliefs. In spite of its repeatedly being challenged and attacked by materialistic, fatalistic tenets, the astrological outlook remains important today. Astrology found its support among the most learned as well as among the most common people, and this is why it has endured for nearly 6 millennia. It was deep within the womb of astrology that astronomy was nurtured, and there has never been any competition or conflict between the two. They were very closely connected and inseparable for many centuries. From natural astrology came the calendar and the ability of man to predict the movements of the sun, moon, and various planets. Natural astrology advanced through the ages and in time was able to predict eclipses of the sun and moon and the appearances of comets. Judicial or mundane astrology was studied as a method of predicting and foretelling the future. Not only was it studied to determine the character and fate of various individual men, but it was also studied to predict plagues, wars, earthquakes, and other natural historical events. It is this branch of ancient astrology which is the astrology of today. It was and is thought by many of the cynical to be a pseudoscience, and is jumbled together with palmistry, numerology, and magic. Yet astrology is defined as the study of the sun, moon, planets, and the stars. It is disappointing that the modern scientist has not examined this age-old science with modern methods and tools of present-day technology to prove or disprove the effect of the heavenly bodies upon the affairs and well-being of mankind. Alchemy has fared better throughout recorded history. It is readily accepted as the forerunner of modern chemistry. The modern chemist has even succeeded in the principal purposes of medieval alchemy. It is now possible to change base metals into gold and silver. Pharmacological chemistry is now approaching the other great goal of alchemy by seeking substances which will cure the physical and mental ailments of man. Modern pharmacy has enabled mankind to live longer and healthier lives. The medieval alchemist was unable to do either, but he made the basic chemical discoveries which led to modern-day molecular and atomic chemistry. Most modern-day chemists are willing to credit the medieval alchemist with scientific achievement. The alchemical workshops even resembled the modern chemical experimental laboratory. But the original 4 Greek elements of earth, air, fire, and water have now been expanded into well over 100. Empedocles taught that everything was formed of these 4 elements mixed in different proportions by attractive and repulsive tendencies. The 4 elements were themselves formed by the attractions or repulsions of 2 pairs of contrasting qualities or cosmic forces. Alchemy contained many highly theoretical components which were derived from the abstract philosophers such as Empedocles, Plato, and Aristotle. Yet the immediate observed events, the sight of compound changing color, vapor turning into metal, or water turning into air, these were undeniable facts. These were also subject to the alchemist's control, for he could repeat them at will. Neither astrology nor alchemy was ever an obstacle to progress. Progress always requires change in ideas and change in beliefs. Yet all change is not a forward progress. A change of ideas or change of beliefs can result in extreme skepticism and regression. Science should be viewed as an aspect of human behavior and founded on a cultural matrix. True knowledge comes from deep human understanding, an understanding which is sympathetic and not critical. Such should be one's approach to the study of astrology and the occult. Man is ever seeking ways to control his fate and destiny. Man is ever asking questions about the universe. No question should ever be considered foolish, superstitious, or stupid if it concerns where and whence man came, where man goeth, or why is man.